He found a strange note under his car's windshield: "Your key is not yours." At first, he didn't think much of it, but when he returned home, he realized someone had already been inside. I noticed the note early Monday morning. A crisp white rectangle trapped between my windshield and wiper blade, fluttering slightly in the autumn breeze. The parking lot of my apartment complex was nearly empty at this hour, just a few cars belonging to night shift workers who'd recently returned home. I plucked the paper free, expecting an advertisement or maybe a notice about building maintenance. Instead, in neat, precise handwriting, were 5 words. "Your key is not yours." I turned the note over. Nothing on the back. Just those 5 words, written in black ink. I scanned the parking lot again, this time more carefully. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty spaces, but there was no one in sight. No lurking figure watching for my reaction. Just the distant sound of traffic from the highway and a pair of crows arguing in a nearby oak tree. A prank? Some kind of weird marketing stunt? I crumpled the note and tossed it onto the passenger seat of my car. Whatever it was, I didn't have time for it. I was already running late for a meeting with a client who'd been difficult enough to deal with when I was punctual. As I drove to work, though, the note kept nagging at me. "Your key is not yours." What was that supposed to mean? My car key? My apartment key? Or was it some kind of metaphor, the key to my heart, the key to success? I shook my head, annoyed at myself for giving it so much thought. It was probably just kids messing around. Or maybe someone had left it on the wrong car. By the time I arrived at Westwood Consulting's glass and steel office building, I'd almost forgotten about it. The day unfolded like most Mondays: back-to-back meetings, lukewarm coffee, spreadsheets that refused to balance, and the constant ping of emails demanding immediate attention. My boss, Sarah, was in one of her micromanaging moods, hovering over my shoulder as I prepared the quarterly projections. "Jenkins wants these by end of day, Alex," she reminded me for the 3rd time. "And make sure the graphics pop this time. Last presentation was too bland." "Got it," I mumbled, wishing she'd find someone else to hover over. It was nearly 7 when I finally left the office. The note resurfaced in my mind as I approached my car in the now darkened parking garage. I glanced at the passenger seat where I'd tossed it that morning. It was still there, crumpled into a ball. I picked it up, smoothed it out, and read those 5 words again. "Your key is not yours." Something about the phrase felt more ominous now, in the dim fluorescent lighting of the garage, with the echo of footsteps and car doors punctuating the silence. On the drive home, the phrase turned over and over in my mind. I tried to dismiss it, but an anxious feeling had taken root at the base of my skull. I switched on the radio, hoping to drown out my thoughts with mindless pop music, but it didn't help. My apartment complex was quiet when I arrived. Most of my neighbors were settled in for the evening, lights glowing behind closed curtains. I parked in my usual spot and walked the familiar path to my building, past the small community garden that no one really maintained and the rusty bike rack where a single blue bicycle had been chained for as long as I could remember. As I approached my door, Unit 207, 2nd floor, overlooking the parking lot, I pulled out my key ring. Car key, office key, storage unit key, and apartment key. All present and accounted for. The anxiety that had been building suddenly peaked as I slid my key into the lock. The tumblers gave way with unusual ease. Normally, there was a slight resistance, a need to jiggle the key just so. But tonight, it glided in smoothly, as if the lock had been recently oiled. Or recently used. I pushed the door open slowly, my heartbeat quickening. The lights were off, just as I'd left them that morning. Everything looked normal at first glance: the small entryway with its coat rack, the open concept living room and kitchen beyond. But something felt off. The air smelled different. Not drastically so, not like someone had cooked a meal or sprayed perfume. It was subtle, an almost imperceptible shift in the apartment's usual scent. A hint of something foreign. I flipped on the lights and stepped inside, closing the door behind me. My eyes scanned the living room, the gray IKEA couch, the coffee table with last week's mail still scattered across it, the TV mounted on the wall. Everything seemed to be in its place. I moved to the kitchen. The dishes I'd left in the sink that morning were still there. The half-empty bottle of wine on the counter hadn't been touched. Nothing seemed disturbed. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here. I moved toward the bedroom, flipping on lights as I went. The hallway was clear. The bathroom appeared untouched, towel still hanging haphazardly over the shower door where I'd left it, toothbrush in its holder. At the bedroom door, I paused. It was closed, just as I always left it. I turned the knob and pushed it open, reaching for the light switch. My bedroom looked as messy as it had that morning: unmade bed, clothes draped over the chair in the corner, laptop closed on the desk. But as my eyes swept across the room, they caught on something that made my blood run cold. The nightstand was moved. Just slightly. Maybe 2 inches away from the wall, not quite aligned with the edge of the bed as it should have been. I approached it slowly, as if it might suddenly spring to life. Had I moved it this morning? I couldn't remember doing so. I kept a few things in the nightstand drawer: a book I was currently reading, some aspirin, a spare phone charger, and a few other odds and ends. I pulled the drawer open. Inside, on top of the usual items, was a key. A brass key, identical in every way to the apartment key on my key ring. My hands shaking slightly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keys. I held up my apartment key next to the one from the drawer. They matched perfectly, down to the worn spots and tiny scratches. But I had never made a copy of my key. Never kept a spare. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as the note's words echoed in my mind: "Your key is not yours." And then I heard it, a soft creak from the living room. The unmistakable sound of weight being placed carefully on the floorboard near the couch, the one that always protested when stepped on. I wasn't alone. My heart hammering against my ribs, I gripped both keys tightly and turned toward the bedroom door. Should I call out? Should I hide? My phone was in my pocket. I could call 911, but would they arrive in time? I opted for silence, moving as quietly as possible toward the door. I peered out into the hallway. Empty. The living room beyond was visible from this angle, and it too appeared empty. Had I imagined the sound? I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway, moving cautiously toward the living room. Another step. Then another. As I approached the end of the hallway, I caught a glimpse of movement in the decorative mirror hung by the entryway, a shadow passing quickly across the living room. I spun around, scanning the room. Nothing. No one. I held my breath, listening intently. For a moment, the apartment was completely silent. Then my phone rang, loud and jarring in the quiet. I jumped, nearly dropping the keys I was still clutching. The screen showed an unknown number. My hand trembled as I answered the call and brought the phone to my ear. Hello. My voice sounded strained, even to my own ears. There was silence on the other end. Then, a voice, low, slightly distorted, as if the caller was disguising it. You found it. Now they know. The line went dead. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, the phone still pressed to my ear, a cold dread spreading through my veins like ice water. They know. Who were they? And what did they know? I looked down at the 2 identical keys in my hand, and suddenly, a memory stirred. Vague and dreamlike at first, then sharpening into focus like a photograph developing. I remembered using a key. This key. But not to open this apartment. It had been a different door. A heavier door, made of dark wood with an ornate brass knocker. I remembered the weight of the key in my hand, the slight resistance as I turned it in the lock, the creak of hinges as the door swung open. But that wasn't my apartment. I'd never lived anywhere with a door like that. If my key wasn't actually mine, where was the real one? And more importantly, what door did this key actually open? I moved to the front door, examining it closely. The lock looked the same as always. I tried both keys, one after the other. Both worked perfectly. My mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Had someone switched my key for a copy? Were they coming back? Was I in danger? Or was I losing my mind? I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment, not tonight. I gathered a few essentials in a backpack, a change of clothes, my laptop, toiletries. As I was about to leave, I hesitated, then took both keys with me. In the hallway outside my apartment, I paused. The corridor was empty, quiet except for the faint sound of a TV from one of the neighboring units. I locked my door and headed for the stairs, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The night air was cool on my face as I stepped outside. I hurried to my car, the parking lot now mostly full as my neighbors had returned home for the evening. I unlocked the car, threw my backpack onto the passenger seat, and was about to get in when I noticed something on the windshield. Another note. Same white paper, same precise handwriting. My hands shook as I reached for it. The door is waiting. 1123, Blackwood Street. Midnight. I looked around wildly, but the parking lot was as still and empty as it had been that morning. Whoever had left the note was already gone. 1123, Blackwood Street. I knew the area, an older part of town with historic homes, about 20 minutes from my apartment. Was this an invitation? A trap? I checked my watch. It was just after 9 p.m. I had almost 3 hours until midnight. I got into my car and locked the doors, trying to think. I could go to the police, but what would I tell them? That someone had broken into my apartment but hadn't taken anything. That I'd received cryptic notes about keys and doors. They'd think I was paranoid or playing a prank. I could call a friend, but who would believe such a bizarre story? Sarah from work. My college buddy, Mike, who lived on the other side of town. They'd think I'd been working too hard or drinking too much. No, I needed to figure this out on my own. And despite every rational part of my brain screaming that it was a bad idea, I knew I was going to Blackwood Street at midnight. I needed answers. I drove to an all-night diner about 10 blocks from my apartment. It was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and a group of college students in a corner booth, laptops open despite the late hour. I ordered coffee and sat in a booth with a clear view of the entrance and my car in the parking lot. The waitress, an older woman with dyed red hair and too much eyeshadow, gave me a curious look but didn't comment on my obvious unease. As I sipped the bitter coffee, I turned the 2 keys over in my hands, examining them closely under the harsh fluorescent lighting. They really were identical, same brass coloring, same pattern of ridges, same slight bend in the shaft. How was that possible? Time passed slowly. I nursed my coffee, ordered a slice of pie I barely touched, and checked my watch obsessively. At 11:30, I paid my bill and headed back to my car. The drive to Blackwood Street felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream. The city streets were nearly empty, traffic lights changing from red to green for no one. I passed closed storefronts and darkened houses, the occasional bar or late-night restaurant providing the only signs of life. Blackwood Street was exactly as I remembered it, a tree-lined avenue of historic homes, most dating back to the early 1900s. Some had been renovated and maintained their grandeur, others showed signs of neglect, with peeling paint and overgrown yards. I drove slowly, looking for number 1123. I found it near the end of the street, a large Victorian house set back from the road, partially hidden by massive oak trees. Unlike its neighbors, no lights shone from its windows. It appeared completely dark, possibly abandoned. I parked across the street and checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. My heart was racing, and my palms were slick with sweat. Every instinct told me to drive away, to forget about the notes and the key and go to a hotel for the night. But I couldn't. Not when I was this close to answers. At exactly midnight, I got out of my car and approached the house. The front gate creaked as I pushed it open. The walkway was cracked, with weeds pushing through the concrete. The porch steps groaned under my weight. And there it was, the door from my strange memory. Heavy dark wood with an ornate brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head. I reached for it, then hesitated, choosing instead to try the key. I pulled both keys from my pocket. In the darkness, I couldn't tell which was which. I chose one at random and slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and the lock clicked open with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the midnight quiet. The door swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. I should have brought a flashlight. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight function. The beam seemed feeble against the pressing blackness of the house's interior. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The air was stale, thick with dust and the musty smell of a place long unopened. My phone's light revealed a foyer with peeling wallpaper and a grand staircase curving up to the second floor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. I moved deeper into the house, my light catching cobwebs in corners and dust motes swirling in the disturbed air. The furniture was covered with white sheets, ghostly shapes in the darkness. In what must have been the living room, I found a side table with a single item on it, an old rotary telephone. It seemed oddly out of place, too clean amid the dust and neglect. As I approached it, the phone rang, sudden and jarring in the silence. I nearly dropped my phone in shock. The ringing continued, insistent. With a trembling hand, I picked up the receiver. "You've come," said the same distorted voice from earlier. "Now you understand." "Understand what?" I demanded, finding my voice at last. "Who are you? What is this place?" "This is where it all began," the voice continued, ignoring my questions. "And where it must end. Look in the drawer." The line went dead. "Drawer?" I swept my light around the room and noticed the side table had a small drawer. I pulled it open. Inside was a photograph, yellowed with age. I picked it up, holding it in the beam of my flashlight. It showed a man standing in front of this very house. A man who looked exactly like me. But the clothes, the car in the background, they were from decades ago. 50 years, at least. I turned the photo over. Written on the back in the same precise handwriting as the notes was a single sentence. "Some doors, once opened, can never be closed." And suddenly, I remembered. Not in fragments or dreamlike flashes, but with perfect clarity. I remembered living in this house. I remembered the key in my pocket, not a copy, but the original. I remembered leaving, trying to forget, starting a new life. But I also remembered my current apartment, my job, my friends. Two sets of memories, both equally real, equally vivid. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the photograph. This wasn't possible. I couldn't have lived here 50 years ago. I was only 32. As I backed away from the table, my phone's light caught something on the wall I hadn't noticed before, a mirror in an ornate gold frame. And in the mirror, a reflection. But not my reflection. The face looking back at me was older, lined with age, hair gray at the temples. I smiled, a sad, knowing smile. I blinked, and the reflection was mine again, young, frightened, confused. I turned to flee, but the front door had vanished. Where it had been was now a solid wall. I spun around, disoriented, as the house seemed to shift and change around me. And then I understood. The key had never been to any physical door. It was the key to a door between realities, between times. A door I had apparently opened long ago, and now couldn't close. As the realization washed over me, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate steps coming down slowly. I raised my light toward the sound, but the beam flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. The footsteps continued, closer now. "Hello." I called out again, my voice barely a whisper. A hand touched my shoulder, firm but not threatening. "You've been looking for answers in the wrong place," said a voice, my voice, but older, wearier. "The key isn't what opens the door. It's what locks it." I felt something pressed into my hand, a key. Not one of the two I'd brought with me, but a third key, heavier and somehow more substantial. "What do I do with it?" I asked the darkness. "You'll know when the time comes," my other self replied. Just as I did. The hand left my shoulder, and I heard the footsteps receding. "Wait!" I called out. "What's happening to me?" But there was no answer, only the echo of my own voice in the empty house. My phone's light suddenly came back on, revealing an empty room. No furniture, no telephone, no photograph. Just peeling wallpaper and dusty floors. And the front door, now visible again, standing slightly ajar. I clutched the new key tightly and moved toward the door, pushing it open wider. Outside, the night was exactly as I'd left it, quiet street, my car parked across the road, the moon partially hidden by clouds. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard a sound behind me. I turned to look back into the house one last time. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw the mirror on the far wall. And in it, not my reflection, but a door. A door I somehow knew led to understanding, to answers. But was I ready to open it? I looked down at the key in my hand. The weight of it felt right, somehow. Familiar. If my key wasn't mine, whose was it? And what would happen when I finally found the right lock?